Mama, cur non intelliges verba mea? These Latin words flowed effortlessly from the lips of 4-year-old Benjamin Carter as he sat at his breakfast table in rural Oklahoma, a place where the nearest university was 2 hours away and Latin hadn't been spoken as a living language for over 1,000 years. His mother, Jessica, nearly choked on her coffee as she stared at her son in complete bewilderment. Benjamin had never been exposed to any language other than English, had never attended formal schooling, and lived in a household where the most exotic vocabulary consisted of basic Spanish phrases learned from television commercials. Yet here he was, speaking what sounded like fluent Latin with the confidence of someone who had been using the language his entire life. What began as a puzzling morning incident would soon evolve into one of the most extraordinary linguistic mysteries ever documented, challenging everything experts thought they knew about language acquisition and childhood development. The Carter family lived in a small farming community where everyone knew everyone, and foreign languages were about as common as snow in July. Jessica was a single mother who worked at the local grocery store, and Benjamin's only regular companions were his grandmother and the neighbors' children who came over to play. None of them spoke anything but English, and the family's television was limited to basic cable channels featuring cartoons and local news. There were no foreign language programs, educational videos, or international content in their household. Benjamin's linguistic abilities had developed normally until his 4th birthday, when something inexplicable began to happen. At first, Jessica noticed him muttering strange words under his breath while playing with his toys. She assumed he was making up nonsense sounds, as children often do, but the words seemed to follow consistent patterns and phonetic rules. When she asked him about it, Benjamin would look confused and say he was just talking normally. The breakthrough came when Benjamin's preschool teacher, Mrs. Patterson, called Jessica with urgent concern in her voice. "I think you need to hear this," she said over the phone. "Benjamin was talking to himself during playtime today, and I recorded some of it because it sounded so unusual. I played it for my husband, who studied classics in college, and he swears, 'Your son is speaking Latin.'" The recording was indeed startling. Benjamin could be heard clearly articulating complex Latin phrases while building with blocks, apparently narrating his activities in a language that had ceased to be spoken conversationally over a millennium ago. His pronunciation was impeccable. His grammar appeared flawless, and most unnervingly, he seemed completely unaware that he was switching between languages. When Jessica confronted Benjamin about the recording, he looked genuinely confused. "I'm not speaking funny, Mama," he said in English. "Sometimes the other words just feel right. They're the words that go with what I'm thinking." Jessica pressed him about where he had learned these words, but Benjamin had no explanation. He insisted that the words simply appeared in his mind, as natural and effortless as his English vocabulary. Dr. Amanda Richardson, a linguistics professor at the University of Oklahoma, became involved when Mrs. Patterson shared the recording with her former college roommate, who happened to work in the university's language department. Dr. Richardson had spent 15 years studying language acquisition in children and had never encountered anything remotely similar to Benjamin's case. She arranged to meet with the family, bringing along recording equipment and a comprehensive battery of linguistic tests. During their first meeting, Dr. Richardson spoke to Benjamin in simple Latin phrases to test his comprehension. To her amazement, he responded immediately and appropriately, engaging in basic conversation about his toys, his family, and his daily activities. His vocabulary seemed extensive, including complex grammatical structures that even advanced Latin students struggled to master. Most remarkably, when Dr. Richardson asked him to translate English sentences into Latin, Benjamin did so effortlessly, often providing multiple ways to express the same concept with subtle variations in meaning that demonstrated sophisticated understanding of the language's nuances. Word of Benjamin's abilities spread quickly through academic circles, attracting the attention of linguists, cognitive scientists, and researchers from around the world. Dr. Marcus Holloway, a renowned expert in classical languages from Harvard, University flew to Oklahoma specifically to study Benjamin's case. Dr. Holloway had authored several definitive texts on Latin literature and could converse in the language as fluently as any living person. His examination of Benjamin lasted 3 days and included extensive conversation, writing exercises, and comprehension tests. Dr. Holloway's final report was both thorough and baffling. Benjamin not only spoke classical Latin with perfect grammar and pronunciation, but he also demonstrated knowledge of regional dialects and historical variations that existed during different periods of the Roman Empire. He could distinguish between the Latin of Cicero's era and that of later imperial periods, adapting his speech patterns accordingly. Most incredibly, he seemed to possess cultural knowledge that went along with the language, referencing Roman customs, religious practices, and social structures that he could not possibly have learned from any available source. The scientific community was divided in its response to Benjamin's case. Skeptics suggested elaborate hoaxes, hidden exposure to Latin instruction, or unconscious absorption of Latin phrases from unknown sources. However, extensive investigation into the family's background revealed no possible avenue for such learning. Jessica had never studied Latin. Benjamin's deceased father had been a mechanic with no classical education, and the family's social circle consisted entirely of working-class individuals with no academic backgrounds in ancient languages. Security footage from the grocery store where Jessica worked, interviews with neighbors, and examination of the family's internet usage and media consumption all confirmed that Benjamin had no access to Latin instruction or materials. Dr. Sarah Kim, a child psychologist specializing in exceptional abilities, conducted extensive psychological evaluation of Benjamin to rule out various conditions that might explain his linguistic capabilities. Her tests revealed a bright but otherwise typical 4-year-old child with normal social development, emotional regulation, and cognitive function. Benjamin showed no signs of autism spectrum disorders, savant syndrome, or other conditions sometimes associated with exceptional abilities. He played normally with other children, enjoyed age-appropriate activities, and demonstrated the usual emotional needs and responses of a preschooler. The only unusual aspect of his development was his bilingual fluency in a dead language. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a neurologist at Johns Hopkins, arranged for Benjamin to undergo comprehensive brain imaging to investigate potential neurological explanations for his abilities. MRI scans revealed normal brain structure and function, with no anomalies in areas typically associated with language processing or exceptional abilities. EEG monitoring during Latin conversation showed typical patterns of linguistic activity, suggesting that Benjamin's brain processed Latin through the same mechanisms used for his native English. The results provided no medical explanation for his extraordinary capabilities. As news of Benjamin's case spread through media outlets, the family found themselves overwhelmed by attention from researchers, journalists, and curious onlookers. Jessica struggled to protect her son's privacy while cooperating with legitimate scientific investigation. Benjamin seemed largely unaffected by the attention, continuing to speak Latin naturally and unselfconsciously during his daily activities. He would narrate his play in Latin, comfort himself in the language when upset, and even appeared to think through complex problems using Latin internal dialogue. The most intriguing aspect of Benjamin's case emerged during sessions with Dr. Holloway, who began testing the boy's knowledge of extremely obscure Latin texts and historical references. Benjamin demonstrated familiarity with works that survived. Only in fragments could complete quotations from authors whose writings were known to fewer than a dozen scholars worldwide and displayed understanding of historical events and cultural practices that were documented only in the most specialized, academic sources. When Dr. Holloway presented him with newly discovered Latin inscriptions that had not yet been fully translated, Benjamin could often provide accurate interpretations, suggesting meanings that were later confirmed by teams of expert translators. The boy's abilities extended beyond mere linguistic competence to encompass deep cultural knowledge that seemed to come from direct experience rather than academic study. He could describe Roman dining customs, religious ceremonies, and daily life practices with the familiarity of someone who had lived them rather than read about them. When asked to explain how he knew these things, Benjamin would simply shrug and say, "I remember Dr. Patricia Chen, a researcher in consciousness studies at the University of Virginia, became interested in Benjamin's case as a potential example of xenoglossy, the supposed ability to speak languages that have never been learned through normal means. Dr. Chen had investigated numerous claims of xenoglossy over her career, but most proved to be cases of cryptomnesia or conscious deception. Benjamin's case was different because of its consistency, the child's age making deception unlikely, and the extraordinary depth of his knowledge. She conducted extensive interviews with Benjamin about his subjective experience of speaking Latin, trying to understand how the language felt to him and where he believed his knowledge came from. Benjamin's descriptions were remarkably consistent. He explained that Latin words simply appeared in his mind when he needed them, feeling as natural and familiar as his English vocabulary. He described having memories of using Latin to communicate with others, though he couldn't provide specific details about when or where these conversations had taken place. Most intriguingly, he sometimes seemed to slip into a different personality when speaking Latin extensively, becoming more formal in his manner and using gestures and speech patterns that seemed oddly mature for a 4-year-old child. The investigation took an unexpected turn when Dr. Holloway discovered that Benjamin's Latin exhibited characteristics consistent with the dialect spoken in a specific region of ancient Rome during the late 1st century CE. The pronunciation, patterns, vocabulary choices, and grammatical constructions all pointed to this particular time and place with remarkable precision. This specificity made the case even more puzzling, as it would require not just knowledge of Latin, but knowledge of how Latin was spoken by particular communities during a narrow historical window, information that was available only to the most specialized scholars and was certainly not accessible to a preschooler in rural Oklahoma. As Benjamin approached his 5th birthday, researchers noticed subtle changes in his linguistic abilities. While his Latin remained fluent, he began to show less spontaneous use of the language and seemed to require more conscious effort to access his knowledge. Dr. Richardson theorized that this might represent a critical period effect, where the mysterious source of Benjamin's abilities was beginning to fade as his brain matured and became more firmly established in English-dominant patterns. The research team accelerated their documentation efforts, conducting extensive recordings and tests to preserve as much information as possible about Benjamin's extraordinary capabilities. The case attracted international attention from universities, linguistic societies, and research institutions around the world. Benjamin and his family were invited to participate in studies across multiple continents, though Jessica was careful to limit her son's exposure to prevent the attention from overwhelming his normal childhood development. The family established a foundation to support research into exceptional childhood abilities, using proceeds from book deals and documentary rights to fund studies that might help other families facing similar unexplained phenomena. Dr. Holloway published a comprehensive study of Benjamin's case that became one of the most cited papers in xenoglossy research. The study documented over 200 hours of Latin conversation, thousands of vocabulary items, and extensive cultural knowledge that defied conventional explanation. Peer review confirmed the authenticity of the recordings and the accuracy of Benjamin's linguistic performance, though reviewers remained divided on interpretation of the findings. Some proposed that Benjamin represented evidence for reincarnation or genetic memory, while others suggested undiscovered mechanisms of information transmission or unprecedented forms of subconscious learning. As Benjamin entered elementary school, his teachers were briefed on his unique situation and instructed to provide appropriate support while maintaining his privacy. His Latin abilities continued to fade gradually, though he retained enough fluency to assist Dr. Holloway with translation projects when particularly challenging texts required intuitive interpretation. Benjamin himself seemed relieved as the intense attention diminished and he could focus on typical childhood activities like sports, video games, and making friends. He retained pleasant memories of his time as a linguistic phenomenon but expressed preference for living a normal life. The long-term impact of Benjamin's case extended far beyond the immediate research findings. Several universities established new research programs investigating exceptional childhood abilities, and funding increased for studies of consciousness, memory, and language acquisition. The case also inspired other families to come forward with similar experiences, leading to the documentation of additional cases of xenoglossy and related phenomena. While none proved as dramatic or well-documented as Benjamin's situation, the cumulative evidence suggested that such abilities might be less rare than previously believed. Years later, as Benjamin became a teenager, he occasionally demonstrated flashes of his former linguistic abilities, particularly when relaxed or under stress. Dr. Richardson maintained contact with the family and documented these residual capabilities, noting that while Benjamin's active Latin vocabulary had diminished significantly, his comprehension remained remarkably intact. When presented with Latin texts, he could still provide accurate translations, though he reported that the knowledge felt distant and dreamlike rather than immediate and natural. The psychological impact on Benjamin appeared minimal, as he had integrated his early experiences into a healthy sense of self and showed no signs of trauma or confusion about his identity. The scientific community continues to debate the implications of Benjamin's case for our understanding of consciousness, memory, and human potential. While no definitive explanation has emerged, the case has opened new avenues of research and challenged traditional assumptions about the limits of childhood learning and development. Some researchers have proposed that Benjamin's abilities represent evidence for collective unconscious access to human knowledge, while others suggest that consciousness might be less individual and more interconnected than commonly believed. Regardless of the ultimate explanation, Benjamin's story serves as a reminder that human capabilities may extend far beyond current scientific understanding. His case has inspired continued research into the mysteries of consciousness and cognition, while providing hope for families dealing with other unexplained phenomena. The boy who spoke an ancient language continues to live a normal life, but his early years provided a window into possibilities that challenge our most fundamental assumptions about learning, memory, and the nature of human consciousness. If this incredible story has expanded your perspective on the mysteries of human consciousness and the extraordinary capabilities that sometimes emerge in unexpected ways, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support enables us to continue investigating these fascinating cases that push the boundaries of what we thought was possible. What do you think explains Benjamin's impossible linguistic abilities? Could consciousness really access knowledge from across time and space? Share your theories in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that notification bell so you won't miss our upcoming explorations into the most mind-bending mysteries that remind us how much we still don't understand about the human mind and soul.